and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We're back, and as I mentioned in the previous podcast, I'm making the most of the time that I have to verbally communicate with you guys about the research and evidence that's on this channel. Over 500 files so far that I've collected on the actual matrix, which I touched on a little more closely in the previous podcast as well. You will have noticed that through most of the files there's a heavy focus on numbers, from IP addresses to birth dates, geographic locations, and URLs of websites, name servers, and a lot of history there too on who's behind this system that we have been encouraged strongly to participate in on a daily basis. And the people behind this may argue that all they have done is answered to our demand. I guess that's probably debatable. When the internet was launched, it wasn't for the general public. It was developed, and some of you may already know this, but for those of you that don't, it was developed by a guy from CERN. Was it Tim Berners-Lee, and then we had Vint Cerf, and it was employed at that point through the United States Department of Defense, and probably because of its potential for file sharing and networking, it was further expanded into the high arenas of learning, and subsequently sort of filtered out. And at some point, there was a deal made with other countries, the governments of other countries, that the internet could be made available to the general public. I also mentioned in a previous podcast that when it was made available, all we really had to do was just call the right people and get it connected through our phone line. But it didn't come with any consumer information. We purchased a product along the lines of, entering into contracts with telecommunications companies and providers, and the only real information we were given was, the nature of our account and how much it would cost, and since that's all they really cared about, that's all they really chose to share. For a lot of people who came online back in the very early days, those that were quite taken by it and swept up by it and fascinated by it, learned very quickly of their own accord how this thing works. They learnt to code, produce their own websites. It was very much a self-learning arena, and as the information grew, the amount of content online grew, more and more people were able to do the same. And being an unpoliced realm, we now have, the main World Wide Web, which is it's completely taken over the world. And then we have other aspects of the web, which is the unsearched content and more lurid aspects of the internet, the dark web, deep web, etc. So where we're at is we eventually got to a point we're in inviting the general public, or, sort of through the power of suggestion from telecommunications companies, the average Joe was able to come online and communicate with zero understanding or knowledge of the tool that they were using. I mentioned in a previous podcast that this is a consumer rights violation right from the start, and it's illegal. So, hello everybody, us being here is a criminal act. We're actually not allowed to be here, and we were not allowed to have this mechanism made available to us without any consumer information about the product that we have decided to engage in, whether we made that choice of our own or we were seduced. But nonetheless, here we are. And if it's not obvious by now, it should be that we are in a realm of binary data. It's represented to us as numbers as we have come to know them through education. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And the binary data that lies behind that in order for this whole system to work. And the internal coding that enables this whole system to work. And there's many aspects to the internal coding as well, which a lot of you may already know. So when we had the average Joe come online, it became a portal of it became a free for all, a global unpoliced free for all, and the content that was allowed online was also unpoliced, and it's taken a long time for any government of any country to actually have formed some basic rules about what constitutes beneficial content and what doesn't. When, of course, they finally got around to considering our collective well-being. Somebody mentioned in a previous comment just recently that they had bad experiences with being exposed to pornography. And on that point, I think we're all aware that there are some countries that have produced more of it than others, and I think we already know who those people are. And the fact that, there was really never any protections in place at a government level either. The idea behind this separation between the internet and government, is a tricky conversation, because I'm not sure that on the one hand, we are trying to, or have done for a long time, trying to improve our conditions through government, the laws that we have to follow, and to improve our way of life and to somehow progress for the highest good of the collective. And in many cases, we still feel that our politicians are not listening. And when they do, it takes too long. Or there have to be compromises to satisfy this person and that company, and it all just seems to take forever. And we end up throwing our hands in the air and coming to the same conclusion that our governments are inept. And it's sort of proven every day. The flip side to that coin is, if you look at a city and everything that has to be managed within a city, it's a massive undertaking. When you look at an entire state and what has to be managed to manage an entire state, it's a massive undertaking. Then when you look at an entire country and apply the same sort of thinking, it's an absolutely massive undertaking. So I understand that the body of government that we live under, and as an Australian, apparently we're allies with the United States. I at some point we became their bitch, but nonetheless, when it comes to defence, we are allies. And I understand that there is a heavy focus, and in a lot of instances there needs to be, in making sure that we have adequate military defence against invasion and attack by foreign countries. Sadly, they are either religiously driven or resource driven assertions on territory. And I understand that there has to be adequate defence in place, and that allies are necessary in case the shit goes down and there's a free-for-all, and we need to have the right tools and enough personnel to get out there and defend our right to survive from anybody who thinks we don't have it. On that point, it's worth noting that approximately 2/3 of the United States annual budget goes to the military. It's also worth noting that the Australian Defence Department buys most of our toys from the United States, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and a few others. So when the internet came about and there were deals done and agreements made for this tool to become available in a more official sense, yet it remained largely unpoliced, I think it was at that point that something had been started without adequate forethought. There did not seem to be really any sort of consideration for the consequences. I think Tim Berners-Lee has spoken on his concerns on social media. Irony, he's actually a part of social media. And to me, as somebody who's been online for over 20 years, that to hear their concerns at this point, it all sounds like it's a bit too late. These were concerns that should have been raised 20 years ago. And I don't know whether Tim Berners-Lee raised these concerns 20 years ago or not, but they're either incredibly late or they are repeats. Now, if they're repeats, that's sort of even more worrying than those guys finally realising that there's a problem. Nonetheless, I'm aware that certain efforts have been made to police the internet a little better, and by policing I don't mean oppression or censorship or silencing or restricting freedom of speech. I mean simple safety measures and protections so that when people do come online, they're able to contribute without being subjected to crimes that simply you don't get away with them offline. So why would you get away with it online? If you continue to harass somebody, well, you get a restraining order. The online equivalent of that is, you get blocked or whatever. but nonetheless, they're sort of raising concerns, and maybe over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been more of a push, and different bodies have emerged that deal specifically with safety online, psychological warfare, and different levels of abuse and harassment and copyright violation and all of this sort of stuff that they're slowly working through. But it's fascinating to me that a website forum like 4chan can exist seemingly unchecked since it started. And I touched on 4chan in the previous podcast when we talked about Prince Philip and a post that was made by myself that was scrapped immediately, and I was kicked out for 24 hours and yada yada. And so it kind of leaves me speechless that where are we, 2021? I mean, that's just a number now, but in terms of how long the internet has been around, and how long it takes the right authorities to police it, or at least put some basic guidelines in for hosts and whatnot as to what content can be allowed online, simply for for our safety, health and safety. That there's still things out there like 4chan that continue to go unchecked. They have free reign. 4chan, as someone made a comment earlier about the pornography, just getting back to that they were exposed to online. For those of you that know of 4chan, firstly, don't ever go there. In me saying that, you probably will, but don't. It's probably one of the more completely disgusting websites for public discussion online. And I want to talk about 4chan a little more closely. It was originally put together by Christopher Poole, who now works for Google. Surprise, surprise. I think he's still there. And he thought that it'd be a great idea. He's, sadly another one of these people that has an idea and automatically thinks it's great just because he really digs it. And he implemented that idea without any consideration for the consequences. For him, it was just a hoot. What a great way to have fun and pull his personal interests into, a public forum type of environment, full of, Japanese anime and pornography. And it's quite heavy on that website as well, and disturbing. If it were highly policed upon entry, and there was some proof of age that was required to enter the website, I think as adults, if pornography is what you're into and you make that decision as a legal adult, that's your business. But when a website like 4chan has no protections in place for kids, and kids stumble across 4chan usually because it's, spread to them virally, they are not asked for proof of age before they enter the website. A lot of them are, from what I can tell, just getting a feel for how old some of these people are through the screen. They're teenagers, young as 12, and they've got smartphones. They can access the site. They have laptops and iPads and computers, and they just let themselves in. I mean, do you agree to this, and you have to be 18 and this, that, and the other. I mean, I can't believe that a realm that was essentially developed by the Department of Defense could drop the ball so hard when it comes to content creators and public forums in terms of their rules. There is no one set of rules that applies to all websites. I mean, offline we have a set of rules that apply to everybody. Don't do dumb shit that hurts you and other people. That's basically it. It's basically what most laws are about. Don't do dumb shit that hurts you or other people, or has the potential to hurt you or you and other people. Snap out of it, be aware of others, and think about the consequences of your actions and what you say. And that's really the aspect of government that I'm talking about, which is specifically to do with public health and safety. And they have to realise that this is a public domain, and that health and safety measures need to be put in place, and that no network, no forum, no IT company is within their right to overrule the government in terms of how the public should be policed online by concocting their own set of rules, their own terms of service, and using these contracts to undermine democracy and the rules and regulations that are in place in society for our protection. And I think we could all agree that we are glad that there are laws about public health and safety. I think we could all agree that we are glad that we have a means of recourse if we are being harassed or physically threatened, or our lives threatened, or physical violence. There are laws that take care of these things in the real world. And unfortunately, they don't seem to exist online across the board. You know, Facebook touts itself as a family-friendly network. That's a load of bullshit. They try. They use AI to automatically cull posts that people report whether it's fair or not. They've dropped the ball on their policing. Their live streaming often includes highly disturbing content that's R rated and shouldn't be allowed to exist. Their reporting system fails once these infringements are uploaded. The damage is already done. So we've been delivered something that is unsafe from the outset. There's no guarantee of safety here. The government has actually endangered us by allowing the internet into the public domain. It is a public health and safety risk, and I made a point of that in a previous podcast, which you might remember. So when we look at a website like 4chan and Chris Paul pulling this thing together and having a hoot of a time, he never really cared if 12-year-olds were accessing the site. I don't believe it's fair to blame parents, because the parents aren't actually to know. As I said from the outset, the households are connected to the internet with no consumer warning. They're not delivered a pamphlet. They are not made aware of all the different type of content that is online that their kids can be exposed to and that they can be exposed to. And they should be. It's a consumer rights violation. We're not just paying for the connection. We're not just paying for the bandwidth. We're not just paying for this, that, and the other, the actual, mechanical side of it. We're accessing content in the same way that we turn a television on and tune into different channels. And in the real world, the programs that we watch all are heavily regulated and have to abide by certain laws to stay on the air. And those laws never translated across to the internet. Now, some of you might be thinking, yeah, but once you start policing this and we lose that. No, I'm specifically talking about public health and safety. And the reason for that is the amount of damage that the internet has done purely from a lack of public health and safety regulations that the government simply did not implement. They failed. Instead, they put us in danger. And to allow websites like 4chan to continue to operate in the manner that they do is a threat to the well-being of other people. It is a direct health and safety threat. The site itself was around before social media, if I remember correctly. And the bulk of its audience, from what I can tell, was sort of, a broad demographic. So everyone from kids through to adults. And so you had kids being influenced by adult content, becoming heavily disturbed by the pornography. Pornography itself is actually an act of war. It is an act of violence, and subjecting children to it should be considered a high crime, no different to child rape and child sex abuse and child sex trafficking, and deep and lasting psychological abuse. And the people who do not have adequate protections on their websites should be charged accordingly, in my belief, and thrown in jail for at least 20 years. And I think that if the penalties were harsher, these sorts of websites would be very quick to make sure that they have the right protection measures in place when people arrive at their landing page. Now, when Facebook came along, a lot of the 4chan kids migrated over to Facebook and just repeated the same rubbish. There's porn all over Facebook. Family friendly? I don't think so. You cannot advertise a website, a network, as being family friendly or having these rules that you only attend to after the crime has been committed. When you do have the power to protect at the front door, you do have the power to inform people at the front door. You do have the power to ask for proof of age before entry. And the reason these guys don't is because they want to maximize their user base. They want to get as many people in as possible. So our health and safety has been traded in for money by a bunch of idiots that the government still can't seem to get under control, which I don't believe for a second, when I can get a red light fine for accidentally going through a red light at something like, I was in the red light for 0.6 of a second, and the cops are yelling at me on a piece of paper that I have to pay up or else. I mean, they seem to have that down. They seem to have it totally together when it comes to people protesting in the streets against being locked in their houses because of a cold, and there the cops are all of a sudden spraying people and threatening people with riding horses about and being intimidating assholes. So they're very, very heavy-handed when it comes to protecting their own interests, but when it comes to protecting ours, let's have a look at world history. I think they're a bit behind the 8 ball, and that's an understatement. We have an internet that is a matrix. It is a control matrix. It is a militarily controlled matrix. All the root zones go back to the States, where the public is endangered. The minute we turn it on, we're endangered because they then sent it mobile. It is in the ether. We cannot escape it. There are ugly cell towers absolutely everywhere, destroying landscapes, reducing land value, scarring our sight. They are unsightly, ugly things. They're like Daleks from Doctor Who. They speak volumes about the type of people who create this ugly, horrible, toxic, air-burning, foul crap and dump it in the middle of communities, cities, suburbs, wildlife sanctuaries, the natural world, and they're proud of it. They're actually proud of it. You know, when we start looking at things like, you know, how hard they've failed, where they've failed, we really are within our rights to sack them and stuff their police force, because I think most of the police force would probably agree with me that their bosses make their job harder by not making it easier to begin with. And that most of the problems that we have in society, whether it's to do with the internet or not, are because the government doesn't know what they're doing. They don't know how to think about other people. They don't go into positions of power most of the time because they have some sort of sincere and abiding connection with the well-being of others. They only want to look at how to increase the bloody economy. They're money-oriented creatures. And sadly, for every move that they make toward loving money and treating money as important more than anything else, they tend to lose brain cells, which is why they end up this stupid. So getting back to when 4chan started, and you know, at some point in there were deals made with Google that they could drive down our streets and take photographs of our streets and our houses, and there was a huge uproar at the time about this being done, and yet there was no valid reason for this being done. Google never presented a valid reason for why they felt, and the United States felt, that it was necessary to photograph our streets and photograph the front of our houses. If you've ever seen a Google car go past with that camera on the top, everyone hates it. Everyone actually wants to kick it off the road. There's a vibe, the driver, the way that they scoot past. You actually want to end its existence because of how disgustingly invasive it is, how infantile the concept is, how abusive it is of the wealth that they have accumulated to waste it on vehicles that go around taking photographs of streets and houses so we can make a map that looks real, and take photos of you too, except they think that if they blow your face out, well, you're still protected. No, you're not. They're pests. They're actual pests. And when you look at the infantile mindset behind so much of the content online and how it is all being flushed through a pre-coded system in the air all the time, and then we ask the question, what is the matrix? What is the simulation? Or Elon, you know, how are your scientists going and trying to find out what the simulation is? The levels of stupid go so through the roof that it's actually hard for a reasonable human mind to comprehend. It's actually difficult for a reasonable person to fathom the level of stupidity that has been thrown at us by these people. People who started their own websites and invited the public to come and play in pornography and abuse, assault, slander, harassment, and the evidence of the harm that it's done is extremely present. But nobody's looking at it. Nobody blames the internet itself. Nobody blames the people who run the internet. Nobody blames the people who run the websites. There's always an excuse. Oh no, it's up to the user what they post. That's not true. When you write a book, there are certain rules you have to follow, or it won't get published. When you create a television program, there are certain laws that you have to follow, or it won't go to air. Why is it any different for the internet? And I think this psyop that seems to have wrapped itself around the heads of our government officials on this topic needs to end. They need to realise that they're actually in charge, and that they shouldn't allow themselves to be bullied by big tech or investors and whatever that want things a certain way to maximise their profits in the United States, the Defence Department, and being able to keep an eye on everybody, and it's just a huge data collection machine, and yada, yada, yada. It is all just a bunch of noise. If you guys cannot present us with something that shows at least some decent measure that you have considered public health and safety, don't do it. Where there are networks, forums and websites of any description that do not consider public health and safety in sufficient enough a way so as to actually protect people before the damage is done, they need to be pulled from the internet. They need to be stopped. They need to be ended. They need to be pulled offline. And you have the power to do that. To everyone else, they do. They have the power to pull Facebook offline. They have the power to pull 4chan offline and see them in court. The state versus. But they don't. It's almost like they've got no balls. It's incredible. So that's a reality that we're dealing with. There's people who really don't care. They don't care at all. And this has become the new normal. They'll say they care. Oh, we appeal to this person, we appeal to that person. Well, not hard enough. And whoever you appeal to, well, they don't care. So it just gets down to they don't care. And I don't consider many of them to still be people anymore anyway. So that's the reality that we're dealing with. So when I'm going through some of the previous videos looking at the comments, and I see, and some of you might laugh at this, but I see Peppy the Frog, and the only 3 words that this idiot has is take your meds, and I automatically think of 4chan. It's kind of, I don't really even know how to explain the feeling when someone is reduced to that level, that the only thing that they have to say to anyone online is take your meds. I'm not really sure where they sit in their own life. That this is the feasible thing for them. I'm not sure how much brain activity occurs during the day for them. I'm not sure what their financial circumstances are. It's easy to insult them. But one thing is for sure, and I mentioned financial because, if they're sitting in a basement somewhere and they've got nothing going on and they're in the middle of nowhere and their life's never going to amount to anything, then maybe saying take your meds to someone is the only way that they can feel like they're in control of anything. And for that, I feel for you. But in terms of thinking about the effect that it has on other people, that aspect of who we are is something that we usually start to embrace when we mature, or when we are educated to a degree that has us consider it. So when they brought the internet to the public and let anybody come on it, and with no health and safety regulations, they put everybody's lives on the line. So right off the bat, welcome to the biggest human rights atrocity that's ever existed on this planet, and it is the internet, and the people responsible are those who sold it to us in the first place. Tim Berners-Lee is responsible. Vint Cerf is responsible. It's way too late for these guys to be noticing issues now. The people like companies like Cloudflare, people who sell their server space and whatnot to different sites, or content delivery networks, are making money from hosting illegal content, from hosting content that harms, from hosting content they're all in on it. And they have absolutely no sense of conscience about what they're doing at all. Most of them are already fully grown adults. The sad part is most of them also are American. In terms of the sites that we here in the West are partaking in, it's all American-based stuff. There are some diversions to that, to Europe, but for the most part it's American. And I don't think that it's reasonable for the rest of the world to get swallowed into an American mainstream if the American mainstream hasn't got an IQ above 4. And that's really all that I've been told overall from 20 years online, is that America doesn't have an IQ over 4 when it comes to this stuff. But we're expected to toe the line because they've got bigger guns, and if there's ever a war, well, we're going to need them. I mean, that's just flat out emotional blackmail and bribery. It's like saying, you better do what we say and follow our low score IQ with everything, or we'll just invade and take you over, or we won't be there to back you up if you get attacked. And to have our lives and our public health and safety being held hostage by dumb people, dumb enough to actually put us in this situation, is unacceptable. And I don't know, maybe there are court cases going on right now to do with trying to improve the situation, and for them to try and figure out what's the best way of managing things. But it's already 2021. We've already had COVID. They're tightening the screws, and it's really the screws that come out as a result of their own stupidity, not being able to admit their mistakes, and doing their best to take it out on the rest of us by limiting our freedoms, so that they don't ever have to correct their own mistakes. It's unacceptable. It's just the height of arrogance, ignorance, and none of them should be in charge. I think we'd all agree on that. The coding, which is more what these files are about. I did really want to get that off my chest, though. But the coding is interesting. 4chan IPs last year, a couple of years ago, was sitting on DC1, DC2, and a DC3, which in EBCDIC is Data Center 1, Data Center 2, Data Center 3, and respectively Data Center 1, 1117, Data Center 2, 1218, Data Center 3, 1319. And I think there was a 16 in there for a data link escape on a 1016. So their IP addresses were lined up in exactly with EBCDIC, which is one of the underlying codes that's used. It's a extended binary coded decimal interchange code, which is still in use today. It was originally brought out by IBM back in the 50s or 60s through System 360, which was a mainframe and that was used by the CIA, and it goes on and on. Nonetheless, their IP addresses were matched it exactly. So when we have an IP address that is in sync with underlying coding, you have to sort of imagine it a little bit like a germ that gets a slipstream through the grid internally and gets a direct feed to the collective. That I may not have explained that clearly enough, but it's an internal connection that's made where what it means is that the content that goes through on 4chan becomes the engine room of reality for all of us. Because what's going on in the ether becomes manifest simply through the magnification of our own minds. It infects subconsciously first, and then it bubbles up, and then it becomes real. It is all a mirage, and the ether as its own that's been infected, our radio waves that are infected with broadcast media and mobile internet, impact us in such a way that our senses are affected and we are mentally and emotionally manipulated in imperceptible ways. But essentially, when, as I said, we have 4chan, whose IPs used to be exactly in sync with the underlying coding that's spinning around all the time, whatever goes on that website becomes an engine room, especially in Poll and a couple of other forums. And that's really quite disturbing, but it should answer the Black Lives Matter question. The reason that movement still exists in the United States is because of the racism that goes on online. All you need to do is go to Poll and you will see how many people hate blacks very quickly. You will see the threats that are made to blacks very quickly. You will see the pictures of lynchings that are posted very quickly. You will hear the racist, derogatory commentary very quickly toward blacks. And unfortunately, the guys on 4chan that do this are teaching it to young boys. And I don't think that a lot of them, sit with the more educated demographic in America. They sound like rednecks to me, but they're not an accurate reflection of most of the American public. And yet, the impact that they have from 4chan seems to reverberate out through the world to the point where Black Lives Matter movement exists. I understand that some of that is to do with policing in America. But I am just giving you one example of the hidden element of power that a website like 4chan has, simply because of, they're with Cloudflare on a 13335, and their IPs was sitting in sync with underlying coding, so they get a clean shot to infiltrate the collective subconscious and keep all this stuff spinning ad nauseum. And the fact that they are still allowed to operate in this way, in such a destructive manner, is first of all the fault of the current owner of the site, Christopher Poole, before that, but overall the United States government. So we can't really have, United States bodies that are forming to protect people and promote diversity and support black communities when the government is responsible for allowing it to continue online. And this is the connection that they're not making because they're dumb. Keep that in mind. They are actually dumb. Yes, dumb. They are not making the connection between online content and the impact it has on daily life, in the real world, in the physical world. They see the internet as sort of like an interactive TV screen, and that's about as much as they can gather most of the time. But they do not understand the very direct connection between what goes on the internet and how that translates in the real world. And I honestly think if they did, they may be a little bit more proactive in making sure that really absurd levels of racism are simply not allowed, that proof of age must be demanded before entry to public networks, that pornography should be an entirely separate section, if it must exist at all. I mean, really, it should be an entire separate section of the internet that requires some sort of internet passport to be able to access. If they really gave a shit and they actually understood what the internet is doing to us every single day, including our kids, and all because of the coding, and all because of companies like IBM, all because of companies like Microsoft, all because of data miners like Mark Smith and the Social Media Research Foundation, who continue to feed on our intellectual content. All because of these people, the United States Department of Defense, there has to be a happy medium. And we're nowhere near it. And where we're going at the moment is they're going to blow us all up. Because once they connect devices, once this whole grid is wired to the internet, including smart cars and everything, it only takes one error at one part of the system for the whole lot to go down. Lights out. It only takes one error for the whole thing to blow up. Let's just count how many lithium batteries there are in the world. And Elon wants lithium batteries in electric cars on the road. Let's just count how much lithium is on the road when there's 7 million cars. In one state. How much lithium is that? Sorry, I'm not sure. How much lithium does it take before only one thing needs to go wrong at one point in the system for the whole lot interconnectively to blow up? They really just don't think ahead. How many cell towers need to be erected before somebody realizes that they are having a massive, making a massive contribution to global warming through the radiation, the accumulative radiation, all the devices that we have, everything that's on the road? We humans are producing the radiation. We can argue about the sun and the tides and the this and the ozone layer and pollution as much as you like. Everyone wants clean air. It's a no-brainer. Don't fucking pollute. But in terms of radiation, we're doing it. Big tech is doing it. Fossil fuels is doing it. All these industries that are thriving on shoving radiation-producing devices in our hand and then putting radiation-producing towers everywhere are the cause of whatever it is this is that we're experiencing. I think we all feel like the air is dry, it's burning, hot days that have a different tinge to them now. Everything's a bit more brittle. The winters don't have that yummy sort of wetness to them anymore. It's just icy freaking cold. They are the enemy. The stupidity is the enemy. The ignorance is the enemy. The arrogance is the enemy. The not thinking things through before releasing the internet to the public and still having the gall to sit there and tell us what to do. It's not going to wear or wash for very much longer. It doesn't for me. I've lost my patience with all of it. I have no problem in at least using this avenue to say what I think to these people and to get them to step off and realize that just because they run big companies and it's a big undertaking and it takes a lot to put it together and they need to make money to keep it all going, that they do not govern me. Internet companies do not govern me. As an individual with a birth certificate, I'm governed by my government, not your fucking government, not your rules. Unless your rules can reflect the rules of my country or the rules of the United States, I have no obligation to sit there and participate in something that you've obviously invited me to through advertising, and you've allowed me to come in, and then you subject me to machine gun rounds of abuse, harassment, racism, insults. People can't even enter a conversation anymore without throwing an insult. It is absolutely laughable. You are absolutely negligent. You are criminally inept, ineffective in any sort of management of any type of public network, and you should be sacked, fired, blacklisted, banned. You are the guys that need to be banned. It is you that needs to be banned from the internet because you don't have the intelligence to operate it with any regard for public health and safety. It is too late to be throwing that flag up now and go, oh, sorry, no, we really do care. I don't think that you do, because you take too long. I mean, God, it was what, the 70s? Even before then. He sort of got hit with the internet maybe around late 70s, 80s or whatever it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. And where are we now? 40 years later? Global warming, for example, was an issue in the 60s. That's 60 years ago. We are dealing with absolute deadheads. So when you go on your Facebook or your Twitter or your Instagram and you're listening to, American politicians bark all the time about what they want to do, you're wasting your time. You're listening to a puppet show. Trump, as great as he is, as clear thinking as he is, doesn't touch on any of this. It's not his area. Why would it be? He's a grassroots guy. Ironic, though, that this is grassroots. How we're affected by the internet, the coding, what it's doing to us, how it's programming events in place, how things happen online first before they happen offline, how our lives are being manipulated and automated by artificial intelligence. And then they want to talk about transhumanism, and they think that they've done a good thing by making a chunk of metal walk from one end of the room to the other. They get their dicks out and shake them and pat themselves on the back and think that they've done an awesome job. I mean, there are no politicians speaking on this. When we're sold their campaigns, they don't talk about how they're going to improve conditions on the internet. They all sit back like they have no power over it, but they actually do. They actually do. China has said no to heaps of things. So is Russia. Maybe that's why the West isn't that keen on them, because they're not prepared to be as idiotic as us. Food for thought. They talk about defending our way of life. Well, let me have a look at what our way of life is. Let's have a look at what our way of life is in a city. Actually look at it. Sure, we get the opportunity to live in a nice house and be comfortable and have food and water and services and all the rest of it. Great. That's our human right, by the way. Anyway, so they haven't done us any favours. They are our actual human rights to have those things. They talk about defending our way of life when our way of life is where only some of our human rights are being met. It's a joke. So when it comes to the global arena and the information that you're taking in every day, some of you people might come online and just want to, be entertained. Others of you get into politics. You're wasting your time. It's all noise. None of them are actually addressing the real issues, or they'll divert your attention to issues that they care about and make you care about them as hard as they do, while the real issues never get tended to. So 4chan, you get the big fail from me. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Take your meds. Anyway, that's it from me for this morning. I'll get into it with you on internet code, more specifically in another podcast. And thanks for being here, tuning in, and shoot some questions at me if you have them. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep on going. Thank you.